As I go out and around town, I go about my business, and of course I run into people, quite often who are not a part of my work, not a part of the church, and people being what they are polite, they try and make small talk. And what's one of the questions that people always ask me? What do you do for a living? Now, I'm not the kind of person who's going to go around all the time loudly announcing to everyone, whether they want to know or not, what I do for a living. But if somebody asks me, I'm going to tell them. So I tell them I'm a minister. I work for St. Andrew's Hesper Presbyterian Church. And sometimes I think they don't know quite how to respond. Because I get this kind of awkward response, oh, a minister, eh? That must be interesting. You know, I don't go to church anymore. Never really did. But I am a very spiritual person, and well, you don't need to belong to a church to love God, right? I love how they say that, as if it were a self-evident truth, as if I should just nod my head and say, yes, there's no real need for the church whatsoever. But that's how they respond often enough. So I either get that response or I get another response. The one where they take the news that I work for a church as an opportunity to tell me about their own personal church horror story. The thing that happened to them or to someone that they know. Where someone was deeply hurt in a church. Or they tell me about the church that became totally irrelevant, that refused to change with the times, and how bad that was. Or they tell me the story about the church that changed too much and too quickly and went with all the fads and how bad that was. Or they tell me that infinitely sad story about a church that they loved that shut down. And if I were to take all of the reaction that I get to the idea of the church out there, and sometimes in here, and I would put it together, I would say that it seems to me that the conventional wisdom in our society today about the church is essentially this. At its very worst, the church is a place where bad things are done by bad people to other people. At its worst. And at its best, that the church is a place that's maybe okay for some, but that is hardly necessary. It's an option, and it's probably way down on that option list. This is what is considered to be the self-evident truth by many people as they think, if they think at all, about the church. And I'm sorry, but I can't just nod and agree and say, yes, that is so, that must be true, even though people seem to expect that. But what can you say? Because it's not as if that is all completely untrue. It is quite possible, of course, for someone to live a good and happy and contented and well-rounded life without participating whatsoever in the church. Could they be happier, more contented, better rounded by participating in the life of the church? Yes, I believe so. But you can't necessarily prove that to someone unless they try it. And of course, it's also true that you can go out and you can do good in the world. You can do a lot of good. And you can do it in Jesus' name. And you can do it without being part of a church. Yes, I happen to believe that you can do it better, that we do it better and more efficiently when we work together as a church. But I am not going to look down on the efforts that anyone puts into making this world a better place in the name of Jesus, just because they don't participate in the life of the church. So it's true. You can be okay without church. And of course, the other part is true. It is true that bad things sometimes do happen in the church. That people get hurt. That people thoughtlessly do things to other people that hurts and wounds them. This kind of thing happens. It has always happened and will always happen. And so if that's where we are, what do you do about it? Is the church, a place where things can go wrong and you don't really need it? Well, why bother? And we might think that this is a modern problem. A problem that previous generations never had to deal with. But that is not true. This morning we read a passage from the letter to the Hebrews. A letter that was probably written to some churches in Asia Minor sometime towards the end of the 1st century AD. And the author of this letter tackles that very problem head on. And he writes this: "Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So you see, even then, back in the 1st century, people were doing it. They were neglecting to meet together, making the decision that it wasn't necessary. Why were they doing that? He doesn't say. But I would suspect that one of the reasons was that they figured they didn't really need to, because they had already heard the good news. They had heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. They had responded to that gospel with faith and joy. They believed in Jesus and trusted in Him. They had all the information. Why did they need to go to the church and get more? I'm sure that's one of the reasons. And the other reason I suspect is that sometimes in those churches, people, perhaps thoughtlessly, did things that hurt or insulted or put down other people. Why do I think that happened? Not because he mentions anything specifically in the letter, but because I just assume that people in the 1st century are more or less the same as people today. Because I assume that the problem with the church is that it's made up of people. And people, by definition, are imperfect. And they make mistakes. So it's bound to have happened back then, just as it happens today. And one of my favorite sayings, a wise man once said, "If you ever find a perfect church, whatever you do, don't join it, because you will ruin it." People are imperfect. People are the problem, you might say. So, there we have it, right there in the letter to the Hebrews. This is the problem. Some people are backing off, not bothering to come. These are probably the issues. And how does the writer respond to that? It's interesting because he doesn't deny the basic facts. He doesn't try to argue that the church is essential for salvation. In fact, his whole argument up until this point in the letter has been that Jesus is all you need. That Jesus, in his life and his death and his resurrection, is entirely sufficient for salvation, to make us absolutely acceptable before God. All you need is Jesus, and you do not need the institution of the church for that. He does not deny that. Nor does he deny that, yes, things sometimes go wrong in the church and we sometimes hurt one another. So where are we at here? Well, I would suspect that the problem is really how we're approaching the whole issue. And that we actually need to look at the whole thing from the other angle. Let me put it to you this way. What if the fact that sometimes things go wrong in the life of the church, and the fact that sometimes we do hurt one another isn't the problem? What if, in fact, It is part of the solution, part of God's solution. Because here's the thing, while it is true that you can go out into the world, all on your own, taking your faith in Jesus, and you can go out there on your own and do good in the name of God, you can live well and happy and all of that, and do great things, there is one thing that will always get in the way of that. One thing that will interrupt and disrupt that. And that is the fact, as we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks here at St. Andrews, the fact that we all carry with us certain hurts, certain wounds. None of us have gone up until this point in our life without having bad things happen to us. And the things that happen to us end up giving us a flawed perspective, a flawed view of ourselves, a flawed view of God, a flawed view of the world around us. And so if you were neglected, if you were abused, if you were mistreated in some way, you carry the wounds from that, and those things keep you from being all that you were ever intended to be, and from doing all that you could do in this world. And I know that some have suffered more than others, and some carry deeper wounds than others, but all of us carry those kinds of wounds to some extent or another. And all of us, for all of us, that gets in the way. But here's something else that is also common to all of us. If we have been wounded, if we have been hurt or disappointed or abandoned in this world, those events in our lives and in our past did not happen in a vacuum. They always happened in relationship to other people. So if you were abused by someone. And probably other people allowed it to happen or could have stopped it from happening and didn't. If you were abandoned by someone, you were abandoned by someone who should have been there. If you were teased or excluded, you were teased or excluded by people. If you were hurt by other people. If you were disappointed by someone, it was a person who disappointed you. And if you were disappointed by something, perhaps for some goal you didn't achieve, I'll bet that the worst part about that was when you had to go and share that with someone else. So the deepest wounds, the wounds that leave the deepest marks upon us, all seem to happen in community, in relationship to other people. And in reaction to that, what we often do is want to withdraw from community. If we've been hurt by community, we set ourselves apart from that. If we've been wounded by community, we therefore try to heal ourselves all on our own. We go out and get those self-help books and try and fix ourselves. And there's a certain logic to that, of course. I mean, if you've been hurt by community in the past, why would you search out more community in the future? But there's a problem. It doesn't work. If you carry wounds in your life, in your emotion, in your psyche, because you have been hurt by other people, you cannot overcome that without other people. You cannot fix that on your own. If you have been hurt by a community, and I'm not saying it had to be a bad community, maybe it was just a good community that made some mistakes. But if you were hurt by a community, the wounds you carry cannot be overcome except by a better experience of community. If you suffered some kind of abuse that made you believe wrong things about yourself and about God and the universe, as much as you try and convince yourself that your views are wrong, you will never change those views unless you experience a community that allows you to see yourself and God and the universe in a new way. The wounds of community can only be healed by a better experience of community. And you want to know of community is least helpful to you as you try and overcome the wounds and the hurts and the burdens you carry? A perfect community. Because perfect people cannot understand what you've been through. Perfect people cannot sympathize with what you've been through. They got it all together. But when you've been through it yourself, and when you've been hurt and wounded and you're on a path to healing, you begin to have tools that you can share with others that they can use in their own lives. It's as we journey together towards wholeness that we make real progress. That's why a perfect community full of perfect people will never help. And that is why the church is such a vital resource as we seek to be and become the best people that we can be. The people God always intended us to be. Because the church is a community where we understand that yes, we are flawed. That yes, we carry wounds. That yes, we have shortcomings. That we often fall short in our love of God and each other. But we also understand that God's grace has been shown to us in unmistakable ways. That God's grace is able to overcome everything and give us hope. And because we have that understanding and that truth, we can be a community better than any at aiding one another in that difficult journey to wholeness and health and fullness in life. That's what the apostle means when he says, and let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another and all the more, as you see the day approaching. That is the incredible potential that is there in the Christian church. That we can really provoke one another to true love and genuine good deeds. Do we always do that? Do we always live up to that potential? No. We sometimes fall short. But I know how we can do it more and how we can do it better. By being intentional about our community as a church. You know, for a lot of people, their experience of the church is they come and they sit facing all together in one direction and learn and maybe sing and worship, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But the real potential of the church community comes when we turn and not face all in the same direction, but turn and face each other. And open our hearts to one another. Open our lives to one another. I'm not saying we're going around all the time, just throwing out everything that's in there. Nobody can live like that all the time. But we can find ways to share, maybe with just a few people, maybe with a small group, the things that really weigh you down. With people you can trust. People you know will listen and respect where you're coming from. If we create those kinds of communities within our larger community, the potential is great. To work and journey together towards deeper healing and greater strength. To free us up to serve God together. And then we will see that the church is not just a place where bad things sometimes happen. Not just a place that might be fine for some, but hardly necessary. But a place absolutely essential for the hope of this world. For hope and healing and life and new beginnings. Let's take a few moments in silence.